This planet is deeply troubled, and the greatest cause of that trouble is our own government. In the speech that Reverend James Lawson referred to, that Martin Luther King made on April the 5th, 1967, the most startling thing that he said at the time, and the thing that caused the most anger and hatred to be directed toward him, was this sentence: "The greatest purveyor of violence on earth is my own government." 31 years ago. Why anyone would have been startled is hard to say, because it was an obvious fact. But apparently we need more education in the obvious than we do examination of the obscure and unknown. Last year, U.S. military expenditures, with all the suffering on the planet, all the sickness and hunger and ignorance and pain, the American military budget was $265 billion. The second largest government expenditure for militarism was $48 billion, and that was the Russian Federation. The United States military expenditures exceed those of the top 12 government expenditures on earth by themselves, and are more than a third of all the military expenditures on the planet. We have a war party in this country, and we've had it all along. And you can call it Democrat for a while, and you can call it Republican for a while, but it has been the special economic interests in this society that have governed us from the time that we founded our governments on this continent. And the people have never controlled those governments. We call ourselves the world's greatest democracy. We are absolutely a plutocracy. It's the most obvious thing in the world. Wealth governs this country, and wealth uses military violence to control the rest of the world as best it can. And we're responsible, and we will pay the price for it.
Telling the truth is risky business. Ramsey Clark spoke here in 1998. If he were to speak today those same words in this country, it's likely that he would be subject to arrest, or certainly at risk of that. Many of the people that you will hear in the course of this film also risk arrest under the new sedition laws and anti-terrorist laws and Patriot Acts for speaking the truth. At least one of them has been killed since they spoke for what they said.
Yeah, well, I'd like to preface this by saying I think John Howard is good.
Right.
And George Bush.
Good, well, I'm glad we got that clear.
Yeah, well, I think, it's a good intro.
Very good intro. Yes, I was hoping you'd say something like that.
If you take this country at the moment, we have John Howard, your Prime Minister, convincing other federal Prime Ministers. We've got very good reasons to have new draconian legislation. The intelligence services have apparently told Mr. Howard all kinds of weird and exotic and terrible things. But no intelligence service in Australia and no government in Australia is going to protect Australians properly unless the authorities look at the Middle East and say, look, there's an awful lot of injustice here. For example, what are we doing in Afghanistan? What are we doing in Iraq? What are we doing to actually right wrongs of people who are oppressed and suffering? And I think that if we spent less time sending our soldiers and our armoured vehicles to Muslim countries, and more time trying to study what's wrong with those countries, why they can't be modern states, and why some of them are occupied. Why are there American bases, for example, now in Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, Iraq, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait? Bahrain, Qatar, Oman, Egypt, Algeria. I mean, we need to talk about what this represents, not just say terrorism, 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 terrorism. It goes nowhere.
In Gulf War I, our military reported in some cases that they were ill within 48 hours. And of course, they had no idea that they were using depleted uranium weapons and certainly were unaware of the harmful effects.
We got sick immediately.
Rashes all over their bodies, brain damage.
We're all just exhausted.
Excruciating headaches. We had no protection.
The president lied.
And really what we are victims of Desert Storm.
The civilian population will continue to be exposed to increasing levels of DU internally. In fact, depleted uranium is a death sentence.
Individuals are depleted uranium casualties, whether they're civilians or combatants.
These people in the Department of Defense are lying, not only to the troops, they're lying to the whole world. They're trying to pawn off our nuclear waste as an appropriate mechanism for a military arsenal.
Largely due to depleted uranium munitions, more than half of the US troops in Gulf War I are now either dead or dying. During the first Gulf War, 340 tons of depleted uranium, which is uranium waste, was dumped on Iraq in the form of bullets, missiles and bombs. In the second Gulf War, 2,400 tons of depleted uranium was dumped in the form of bullets, bombs and missiles. That's roughly the equivalent of 120,000 Nagasaki atomic bombs in terms of radiation dispersed.
The t-shirt I am wearing says, "The battlefield is between your ears. Put up a fight." And I think that's really incumbent upon all of us as citizens of so-called free societies, of liberal democracies, not to be supine, not to be servile, not to be just consumers of corporate-generated propaganda, but to think critically as citizens, to deconstruct arguments, to find out what they're saying and why they're saying it. And as I was talking to a friend earlier today, the key question to ask in most political discussions is, who benefits? Who benefits from Australian troops being sent to Iraq? The Iraqi people, the Australian people, the United States? These are questions, I think, that need to be asked and answered as well.
There can be no great disappointment where there is no great love. Those who say to me, stick to civil rights, I have another answer. That is that I've fought too long and too hard now against segregated public accommodations to end up segregating my moral concern. I'm not going to do that. Others can do what they want to do. That's their business. Other civil rights leaders, for various reasons, refuse or can't take a stand or have to go along with the administration. That's their business. But I must say tonight that I know that justice is indivisible. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
My expertise, as you know, is CIA, Marine Corps, 3 CIA secret wars. I had a position in the National Security Council in 1975 as the chief of the Angola task force running the secret war in Angola. It was the 3rd CIA secret war I was part of. The National Security law creating the National Security Council and the CIA, as you know, was passed in 1947. The CIA was given this charter to perform such other duties and function as might be necessary to the national security interests, and given a vague authority to protect its sources and methods. And I think it was in the mid-'80s that I coined this phrase, the Third World War, because in my research I realized that we were not attacking the Soviet Union and the CIA's activities. We were attacking people in the Third World. And I'm going to just quickly, in the interest of time, just give you a little sense of what that means, this Third World War. Basically, it's the third, I believe, in terms of loss of life and human destruction, the third bloodiest war in all of history. They undertake to run operations in every corner of the globe. They also undertook the license of operating just totally above and beyond U.S. laws. They had a license, if you will, to kill, but also they took that to a license to smuggle drugs, a license to do all kinds of things to other people in other societies in violation of international law, our law, and every principle of nations working together for a healthier and more peaceful world. Meanwhile, again, they battled to convert the U.S. legal system in such a way that it would give them control of our society. Now, we have massive documentation of what they call the secret wars of the CIA. We don't have to guess or speculate. We had the Church Committee investigate them in 1975, gave us our first really in-depth, powerful look inside this structure. Senator Church said in the 14 years before he did his investigation that he found they had run 900 major operations and 3,000 minor operations. And if you extrapolate that over the whole period of the 40-odd years that we've had a CIA, you come up with 3,000 major operations and over 10,000 minor operations. Every one of them illegal, every one of them disruptive of the lives and societies of other peoples, and many of them bloody and gory beyond comprehension almost. Extensively, we manipulated and organized the overthrow of functioning constitutional democracies in other countries. We organized secret armies and directed them to fight in just about every continent in the world. We encouraged ethnic minorities to rise up and fight, people like the Mosquito Indians in Nicaragua, the Kurds in the Middle East, the Monks in Southeast Asia. We have organized, and we still do, and fund death squads in countries around the world, like the Treasury Police in El Salvador, which are responsible for most of the killing of the 50,000 people just in the 80s, and there was 70,000 before that. And orchestration, CIA, secret teams, and propaganda led us directly into the Korean War. We were attacking China from the islands Quemoy, Matsu, Thailand, Tibet. A lot of drug trafficking involved in this, by the way, until eventually we convinced ourselves to fight the Chinese in Korea, and we had the Korean War, and 1 million people were killed. Same thing for the Vietnam War, and we have extensive documentation of how the CIA was involved at every level, or the national security complex, because it's a very cooperative thing, into manipulating the nation into the Vietnam War.
The general public's view of modern warfare is almost entirely via the lenses and keyboards of journalists who are in bed with the military. The result of that, some might say an obscene relationship, is that children like this, who have been damaged badly by war, are never reported, or almost never reported. It's the very occasional one, perhaps. And Napalm, like this, destroying villages using the American Air Force bombers, and also others who they can lure into their trap, such as the Australians. These napalm bombs that you see dropping are heading for villages, they're heading for farmhouses, they're heading for civilians, and that has been the consistent style of all of the wars that have been created for commercial reasons and territorial reasons by the CIA and their collaborators. When you look at the heads of the CIA, you see that they are the same people who are the heads of the Wall Street Stock Exchange. And it is those large companies that find amusement in terrorizing and murdering very large numbers of people in many countries all over the world. At what point do we decide to cease supporting a government, our government, who supports and perpetuates that kind of terrorism?
The invasion was swift, intense, and merciless.
That I oppose the war in Vietnam because I love America. I speak out against it not in anger, but with anxiety and sorrow in my heart, and above all with a passionate desire to see our beloved country stand as the moral example of the world. I speak out against this war because I am disappointed with America.
The pictures, the image of the Iraq War, which has become dominant in the war of the images, is the image of the tortured prisoners, the naked Iraqis, the woman Marine pointing to a naked Iraqi with that horrible grimace on her face, the Iraqi prisoner lying dead and a Marine giving a victory salute to the camera because an Iraqi is lying dead. These are the images which have already become the images of the war.
Peter Dale Scott, professor at the University of California at Berkeley, has conducted extensive research on covert action and CIA activities. The results are detailed in his book, The Iran-Contra Connection.
I think the real issue was that both the administration and the majority of the people in the committees were frightened that the real scandals, the drug scandals, for example, would really threaten any future conduct of covert operations on the scale that they had been handled in the past. And so they were trying very deliberately to limit the damage. This was damage control.
And so they were pulling their punches on all the major questions and issues of what really happened in this thing, what the CIA's role was. Anytime they got into anything that was really sensitive about exactly that, exactly what the CIA's role was and exactly what laws were broken and when, they went into secret session.
There was a lot of talk during the hearings about covert operations, national security, the necessity of secrecy in conducting foreign policy. But some experts claim that covert action does not work in the interest of the U.S. national security, nor does it create a more stable world.
To think of the democratic governments that have been overthrown in the last 30 years by military coups is almost like giving a capsule history of CIA covert operations in the last 30 years. I mean, there was the overthrow of Prime Minister Mossadegh in Iran in 1953. There was the overthrow of Arbenz in Guatemala in 1954. There was the overthrow of the Brazilian government in 1964. There was the overthrow of the Ghana government in 1966. A lot of the governments I've just mentioned got into trouble with the international oil companies because they tried to assert their national prerogatives over their own resources. Time after time, the CIA has come in on behalf of those multinational companies.
You start a huge covert war that you intend is going to be secret. It's not secret from the Russians, certainly not secret from the Laotians who are getting shot at, or the Angolans, or the Nicaraguans, or whoever it is. It's covert from the American taxpayer and voter. And a lot of people make a lot of money off of it. And it attracts criminals, and it has every single time.
Who are the names, the faces, behind these covert activities. Some, like Oliver North, General Secord, Albert Hakim, are practically household names. But whether there is actually an organized secret team or simply a loose association of individuals, it is clear that there are a number of people who have been working actively behind the scenes in these covert operations. Some of the names are Theodore Shackley, who was Assistant Deputy Director of Operations for the Central Intelligence Agency as of 1976, under George Bush, who was CIA Director at the time.
And therefore, I think that one has to try and develop and strengthen alternative networks, information networks, which supply genuine information, without which you can never have an alert and vigilant citizenry. And without an alert and vigilant citizenry, the politicians literally get away with murder.